Hey, welcome to part 2 of our show all about Bernie Torme. I'm your host, GK, and you're listening to 4550 RPM, remembering past musos born in the 40s and in the 50s. If you haven't listened to our first part on Bernie Torme, you might need to go back and listen to 4550 RPM episode 11A. It'll be the one right in front of this one in the playlist. This is episode 11B, where the main focus is a discussion I have with my co-host Brian about Bernie Torme's style, his approach to playing guitar, his equipment, and how he got that sound that I absolutely recognised as being his. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to kick off with a few minutes of Brian giving us a demo of Bernie's sound. Then Brian and I are going to talk about Bernie, and Brian's going to tell us what's going on. That is, what is this sound that Bernie has, how he got it, and the equipment that he used. And then he's going to give us another demo of that, and we'll probably finish on that. Now, I'm going to do my best to make it possible for you to go straight to Brian's videos here, and you can skip the discussion part if you like, but I really recommend you don't do that, as the discussion explains what Bernie was actually doing, especially when he was playing live. So do listen to that, but have a look at the videos as well, but I'm really suggesting you have a listen to what we're talking about here. Okay. So don't forget to like, comment and subscribe and do all that good stuff for us. If you like what we do here on Philosopher Rock and 4550 RPM, then you can help us out by hitting that like button. Okay, so let's go to Brian now, and this is an example of Bernie's tone and the phaser sound. If you want to know what this all means, as I've said maybe a couple of times now, sorry, but you got to listen to the discussion following this first video. All right, hit it, Brian.
So you can hear I've got the Fender Strat, and I've got, in the single coil position, I've got a stacked humbucker near the bridge, but in the same angle as something like Torme would use. And you can hear all the noise from it. I've got the programmed in, I've got a JCM 800, which is a simulator for a Marshall head. And I think I've got it paired with a Marshall cabinet in my unit here. So, for example, I wanted to demonstrate how the modulation plays an effect on the guitar tone. So here's without the modulation, which would be, in this case, a phaser. So I've got delay on it, which gives it the little repeating echo, but here's with a little bit of modulation. And I don't know if you can hear this on the camera, but it's got a slight waver to it. So you'll hear a little bit of frequency modulation as it cycles through. It's almost like a little bit of a wah pedal. So Torme would use that, I think, to kind of give it a wider sound, but also when it hits the apex of the frequency modulation, gives it that sweeping sound similar to cocking a wah pedal forward or backward. So that could be handy for simulating a wah, but also giving it a wider sound when it sweeps through the modulation. certainly adds to the overall sort of chaotic effect, the chaotic sound, the very raw sound of the guitar tone.
Yeah, thank you again, like I said, for even inviting me to be a part of this, because it did cause me to actually go in and kind of dissect what was going on with him. Something that I sort of like, intuitively knew, but then didn't really drill into. So I watched the video that you had suggested, and then I went back and listened to, I wouldn't say the whole catalog because I didn't go through all the Gillan albums again, but like I said, I do revisit them fairly frequently, and those albums had a profound effect on me. I would say not so much as a guitarist, but as a songwriter, because I was already a fan of Gillan, from the Deep Purple era, and the other things that Gillan had been a part of. But then it was like when I heard Glory Road for the first time, the album Glory Road, I had been working at a particular company, and we would play music while we were working because it was like production work, so we could blast the radio. And the coworker had the same musical taste as me, but he was about 10 years older than me, so he was into Gillan post Deep Purple when it was actually happening. So he had brought in Glory Road and played it, and I was like, what in the world is this? This is like everything that was great about Gillan with Deep Purple, only it wasn't, Deep Purple. But so like the song No Easy Way and Runnin' Whiteface City Boy, it was just like, it hooked me straight in. It hooked me straight in because had that edge. And, for what it's worth, I thought kind of like that Torme was not only a good replacement for Ritchie Blackmore, but I know it's probably sacrilege to say it, but I liked him better because where he had a more raw, unpolished edge to him than, more than Blackmore did. And I felt like when the Gillan albums were coming out, I feel like it was more in line with what, I don't know all the, behind the scenes politics with Deep Purple. I know that there was friction for sure, especially between Blackmore and Gillan, but I feel like it was more the vehicle of the Gillan band was more in line with what Gillan wanted to do, so he could be more expressive and creative. I feel like it was just natural. I feel like he has a little bit of a more wild edge to him.
Yeah, definitely.
And Torme sort of like brought that out. So when you ask kind of like what's going on there, so with any guitarist or any artist, there's multiple things that can contribute to their sound or their approach or their delivery. So I guess the top three things that I sort of narrowed it down to when you asked me to do this was their equipment that they're using, then their style, and then their recording engineers. So, for example, if I'm playing through a particular setup or a particular, like we would call it, well, because you're a musician and a former working musician, professional musician. So like your equipment that you're using can not only influence your sound, because that's what's, the end product, but it can also influence your playing, because if you've got a lot of distortion, on your amp, or if you've got a particular type of guitar, you're going to have a different feel to it. And it actually, I guess probably non-musicians might not know this, but the instrument that you're using and the rig that you're playing through can actually, it works both ways. Not only does it impact the listener's viewpoint or the listener's experience, but it also impacts the player So like I have certain guitars that I use for certain approaches that I want to achieve in my music, just like any other tool. And, your amplification and all of the modification that you have that goes into those things can actually have an impact on me as a player. I'll play different based on what I'm using. So, and it's not necessarily because I choose to, but because it invokes a different style or a different feeling when I'm playing. So, for example, Torme uses Marshall amplification and Marshall speaker cabinets. So, and he's even got one that I should say had. He no longer is with us, unfortunately, but obviously the reason for this podcast. But he has a cabinet that goes all the way back to like the early 70s, a Marshall cabinet. And that particular combination of amplification and speakers is known for having a sound that is very mid-range and high-end, kind of like not so much a lot of bass or low end in it. So as he kind of is working, and you notice it and hear it in all of his stuff, he's really working in the sort of like mid to high range frequencies. And that really works well with somebody like McCoy. So, the objective of good music, or I would say good music, especially hard rock, is like that you get everything placed, every player placed in their proper spot in the mix. And so Torme comes in and cuts right through that in that mid range. He sits right there, and he's more, likely to make an impact in the music if he sits right within his mix there. So then you've got like his guitar. So he's known, primarily for playing a Fender Stratocaster, which his in particular has the 3 single coils in the pickups. So the pickups are the magnets that pick up for those who don't know guitars, but he's got the three pickups there, and he uses that bridge position pickup. It's not a humbucker, which is a double coil, it's a single coil. So it doesn't really get a lot of overdrive, but when you overdrive it, when you use a lot of distortion, it gets a particular sound. And again, it's going to be in that mid to high range. So he's basically compounding these. He's using the guitar and the amplification to get this mid to high range sound with a sort of raw kind of sound, I would say. So then I guess the other thing that I noticed for sure was that he seemed to have something going on, like in that live video that you sent me. For the first time, I kind of actually consciously noted that he's got something else going on in his sound. And I was like, it sounds like either a chorus or a flanger or a phaser. So that's just an effect that a guitar player can use. And then when I looked at I watched an interview with him talking about his rig, and he said, in fact, that he did use a phaser. So that's not something that most guitar players would have on all the time. And I'm not saying he had it on all the time, like 100% of the time, but I noticed in hindsight, looking back, I was like, yeah, when he was playing with Gillen, he definitely used a little bit of a phaser on a lot of the stuff. And that's not typical for a guitar player to use. So I think it was just added a little to his trademark. That's it in a nutshell.
Okay. And what about his finger work, Brian? He gets those tortured sounds, if I could say that, positive way.
Yes.
I think I said to you, it sounds like he's wringing that neck. You know what I mean? He's squeezing everything out of it.
Yeah, and I think that he really is. He seems to opt for a more like raw approach, a more like unhinged kind of heavy-handed approach over like an elegant or an accurate approach of the note articulation. So he's not so much worried about hitting every note, and he's more concerned with, I think, just the raw emotion of it, which definitely comes out. You can hear that. So, for example, he's got a bit of a sort of a mix of punk and blues, infused with the hard rock or heavy metal. So he doesn't do much in the way of like blending any sort of jazz or classical it's heavy on the blues, a lot of like pentatonic scales and things like that. And then the punk aspect comes in where he doesn't do a lot of palm mutes where, you know, a lot of chin, 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 or he lets kind of everything, kind of like lets everything ring a lot of times. So he's got this really loud, overdriven amp. You can tell he's playing this stuff loud. He's not, and he even mentions that in his rig rundown on the video. He talks about how he can't really get the sound he wants unless he turns that sucker up, you know, turns it up really loud. And that's where you'll get things like some feedback, some squeals and things like that. So he also tends to use the whammy bar pretty aggressively. So, you know, he's got the harmonic dives in there,
I love that.
Yeah. And he does a lot of, in between the riffs, he does a lot of like sort of what I would consider like improvising, you know, kind of a lot of guitar fills between the riffs.
I like it. And is that mostly because, say, when he's a three-piece, he's got to be able to do that as well, you know, to fill that space, if I could put it like that.
Yeah, he's got so much more, he adds so much more texture than what would normally be there, like you said, to kind of fill the space. It can be a little much sometimes, you know, when you've got a good drummer doing fills, a good bass player kind of adding some things in, and then, you know, you got a guitar player who plays like a very no holds barred kind of approach. Now, I did forget to mention that he uses a muff distortion pedal, and a muff distortion pedal has a certain sound to it as well. Now those have a tendency to have a sort of mid to high range kind of sound, and they're not known for having a real refined distortion where it's more of a really kind of a broken up, he kind of has a sound with all these things built together. He kind of has a sound like his speakers, something's wrong with his speakers, you know, like it's noisy, to start with. So then he also, like I said, he doesn't do a lot of like really fast, runs on his leads, like nothing like a Steve Vai or Yngwie Malmsteen, or, you know, like with Blackmore, you would get a lot of classical thrown in there. So he'd have some quick runs. There's not a lot of that with Torme, but that's not really his style. Now, I think that later on in the late 90s, when he was doing some other projects, whether it was somebody else's idea or whether it was his idea, there was a little bit more refinement, like when he was in bands like Silver. So it's not like he's a one trick pony per se. He can do some other things. I think just when he's in his own kind of zone, that's what he does.
I like a wide range of things like you do, Brian, and I do like some elegant guitar work and some really, smart type sounding guitar work. But every now and then I like to listen to Torme, and just everything you just said, that's why I like to listen to him. That raw stuff, you know, that we're not too worried about hitting it all, getting it all right and all straight, but it just sounds so good. And some of feedback and squeals, I like that sometimes, where other times it's completely unacceptable, right? You know what I mean?
Right.
Depends.
Well, so, I mean, even the equipment that he uses lends to the style that he has.
Right.
If he was to play that style through any other like concoction of, you know, amplification and effects, it would just come off sounding really flat and dull.
Right.
Even as wild as it is, it would still come off just sounding really bad. And I think that that particular span there with Gillan, I think that the rawness of it, especially at that time period, they were just coming out of punk rock, you know, the punk rock scene, especially over in England. And it wouldn't surprise me if, you know, well, because of the new wave of British heavy metal also, it was like I know Gillan fit kind of right in with that whole scene and that whole crowd. and where bands like Deep Purple were kind of starting to fade into the background with, their popularity. Gillan was like headlining, Donington and stuff like that, where he was kind of moving into like a more limelight sort of position. But over here in the United States, we had no clue about anything like that. If you didn't pay attention to what was going on over in England, you weren't going to hear Gillan on the radio here. As big as he was, and as great as those albums were, like, I mean, they were just monster rock albums, so good. It's a crime that they didn't really get the exposure over here, but unless you were reading the magazines or just had your finger on the pulse of what was going on with the new wave of British heavy metal, you weren't going to hear Gillan. And I think that's largely why I didn't know who Torme was until around the mid-90s. I didn't even know who Bernie Torme was, never heard his name.
Yeah, so those albums that he played on, Mr. Universe, Glory Road, Future Shock, Double Trouble, I think I might have had them all. I can't remember, because I was into it.
Yeah, I've got them all on CD. It inspired me to just buy everything that he did, especially from that time period. But the Gillan stuff, you could tell when he was gone when Yannick Gers came in and took his place, you could tell the music was different. Gers's approach, it's kind of similar, in his playing style, but not his sound for sure. So both of those guys really just were not on the radar for guitar heroes, even though I think it's a crime that at least Torme wasn't bigger in the general rock scene. So talking about how we got into Torme, how did you come across Torme? What got you into Bernie Torme?
Well, it was a similar route to yours. So I'm pretty sure I had, when it came out, I'm pretty sure I had Glory Road in 1980. And so I knew, I really didn't know who it was, but I knew I liked it. If course I knew who Gillan was, I didn't know Torme, but I knew I liked that sound. And then, if you go on YouTube, you can see this concert. It's Gillan Live, 1981 at Oxford. Anyway, one night way back in, I think it was 80, it might have been 82. Now this is going to sound a bit funny, but I didn't have a VHS recorder, but I had this blank VHS tape that I used to carry around with me. And if I go to someone's place and if something came on the telly, like music-wise, I used to say, hey, can I record that, And I was at a friend's place late one night, right? And it was a late night music show. And that concert that's on YouTube, I'll link it here, it came on and I went, bang, I need to use your your recorder. And bang, I whacked this tape in, and I hit record. And so I was in the band and we were playing at the time. I got that tape, recorded that concert. It was a late night show, and then I think it was like the next day I said to the guy, I said, you've got to see this guy, right? Like, I know we all know Gillan, but this is live. You've got to see this fella, the guitarist, and the bass player, actually. And so we played it. We played it, and we played that VHS tape nearly till it was, we really gave it a good flog in that tape. And what happened was the influence for us as a band. Now, this is going to sound a little bit funny, but you've got to remember, these were different days, and we were pretty young and impressionable. But what happened was we didn't 100% know who he was, but we knew we liked his style. So one of the guitarists in the band started dressing like him when we played gigs, right? And then me and the other guitarist, if you watch that concert, you'll see he's got one black boot and one white boot. Well, what we did was we got 2 pairs of black boots. We painted one white each. And him and I, when we go on stage, I'd wear a black white boot and he'd wear a black. And it was all because of Torme from that concert.
That's hilarious.
So it's pretty funny, but that's the impact on me.
Yeah.
So, from then on, I've been a bit of a fan. And so after that, when he came out with the Electric Gypsies, by the way, I think that is the best band name of all time. I wish I'd have thought of it. I really do. Like, there's a lot of great band names out there. And, when you're looking for a band name, you can sit around and come up with all these things. But for me, I've always thought, I wish I'd have thought of Electric Gypsies. I think that's just a great name for a band. And it just suits him and his style and his appearance, right?
It does suit his style, yeah.
Yeah. What a great name for a band. So, and so after the Gillan thing, I sort of enjoyed the Electric Gypsy stuff. And then obviously after that, GMT. So when he was with, Robin Guy and John McCoy, I just thought that was fantastic. And I'll link that concert in the show notes because it's the one I asked you to look at. And if you go and watch that concert, you'll understand what Brian and I are talking about and how I'm saying, just how wild he is on that guitar and the sounds he gets.
Now, were you a fan of when he was in the band Silver? Because I really thought that was a fantastic super group, personally.
I haven't had a listen. I haven't listened to it enough, so I can't comment. But I know if, like, Gary Barden was in front of it, that's going to be something special. But I need to go back and have a listen to that. I was across the GMT stuff, the Desperado thing, which I think, but we're recording here. When you saw Dee Snider, did you put on a good show?
Oh, it was amazing. I'm trying to remember. I know where I saw him and I know when I saw him, but I can't remember if it was Twisted Sister because I don't think they had done their reunion. So I think it was just Dee Snider, but they did a bunch of Twisted Sister songs. But and it was in a club that was small enough to where we could get right at the front of the stage. So, it was great. Yeah. A really good show. So now a lot of people might not know this unless they have followed you, but if it's a first time listener or something now, they might not realize that you were a bass player. So, or are a bass player. And so that would probably, be maybe part of the reason why you're a fan of McCoy as well, because he kind of fits right in as far as a bass player goes to, a good sidekick for Torme, because he's kind of uses some little bit of distortion on his bass.
Yes.
He does a lot of those. He does a lot of those fills and things too, So.
Yeah. And just the other thing with him as well, is just his, presence. If you look at him when they play anything live that he does, like on Gillan and his stage presence and the way he comes across is just like nobody else really. You know what I'm trying to say? He's got his own man has got his own style, and so yes, as a bass player, and let's be honest, I'm a big person as well. Of course, it appeals to me.
He's a bit formidable, It's like
yeah.
I was gonna ask you, did you copy his style when you were his vision?
Yeah, no, I didn't. No, no, not really. No. We just did the black boot, one white boot, and then one of the other guys actually almost like he was appeared as Torme did. He just followed his fashion, and I guess people must have thought, hey, who were these guys? Because no one would have known especially here in little clubs and pubs, people wouldn't have known and might have thought, this guy's crazy,
They might not have been wrong, but
they would have been spot on, I'd say.
Well, I've had a lot of fun talking about this, Garth, so thank you for inviting me. It's been a good experience for not only me to revisit the stuff that I hadn't really kind of like dissected in the past, but also just be able to get on here and chat with you, because I know I love doing these podcasts and we haven't done something together in a while. So thank you for having me on.
Yeah, well, I couldn't do it without you. I just knew you'd know what I was trying to say. Because when you try to talk about these technical things, if you don't know, you could come across, like I said, a fair bit of slang there. When I'm saying, he's strangling that neck, you know what I mean? But I knew you'd know what I meant, right?
Oh yeah.
But I needed someone to come on and talk about more than just ripping it up and strangling the neck. So I thank you for your time. And we've got to do more together because we always have a few laughs, and I hope people enjoy what we do when we get together, because we just got so much in common, even though we're not exactly the same age, and we're from pretty different backgrounds, but also totally different countries. And as you've said more than once when we've done shows together, a lot of the stuff you and I talk about hasn't necessarily penetrated heavily in the USA. And so it's good to find an American to talk to who knows what they're talking about when you mention these things. That's not to say Americans don't know, so don't misunderstand me, but it's just not common to talk with an American musician who will know a lot of these things that I like to talk about. So
true. That's very true. And I would encourage people who are listening to go and check out Torme's stuff, and especially for me, the Gillan years, and then also any live footage, because you really get a full sense of, with the visual on the videos, you get a full sense of Torme's, like just his mannerisms and his body thrown into his whole body thrown into his playing, and there's a lot of good Gillan footage of him playing. Yeah, so I would encourage listeners to go check that out, and I know you would.
I'll put some links. I'm going to put some links in the show notes here. Alrighty. Well, thanks, Brian. Thanks for your time. Now, I don't know what you're going to do with the rest of your day, but I'm going to go to bed. Thanks for coming on, Brian.
Thank you. Have a great one.